you just got to disagree and commit and kind of go, well, we're not surfacing anything else here. We need to go left or right, and we're going to either disagree and commit, but somewhere we got to move. We got to go. And that's really important.
Hello and welcome to the Emerge Product Market Fit Academy series, where we're joined by leading operators and founders in edtech to share practical insights and advice for early stage founders. If you're building the future of learning and work, then this is for you. I'm Zara, and I'm joined by our guest today and Emerge venture partner, Sasse. Kara is Chief Product Officer at Springboard, the online learning platform preparing students for in-demand technology careers through mentor and instructor-led programs. With a long history in the edtech space, she was most recently CPO and COO at Knowledge to Practice. She was also one of the first employees at Everfi, and as EVP of Product Development, she built from scratch and led the curriculum design, product development, and customer support teams that built Everfi's award-winning learning platform with an annual reach of more than 1 million students at over 5,000 schools and universities across the US. Everfi was acquired by Blackboard in 2021 for $750 million. A veteran of the edtech industry, she was also an early employee of Blackboard and spent 6 years in several global product marketing positions. Kara, thanks so much for joining us. I am really excited for this conversation.
Hi, Zara. Great to be here.
You can probably do the pronunciation of the two different Blackboards better than I can.
I know. It's tricky. The irony of how that landed.
Let's now move into the heart of our conversation. Today, we have a lineup of 3 key topics to discuss, all centered around product. First, we'll cover the speed-quality trade-off in engineering when it comes to the early days of building product. Then we'll move to product road mapping to explore how product roadmaps should evolve as startups scale. And then finally, we'll cover the role of a product leader, and we'll look at effective strategies from transitioning from a centralized decision-making process in an early startup to one that seeks broader consensus across a leadership team and its customers. We have a lot to cover today, so I will dive straight into the first topic on the speed-quality trade-off. Now, for this episode, I did something a little different and sourced questions from founders directly. So I'm going to share the exact questions I received from them. So, Kara, to start us off, when you're trying to balance speed and quality and you're encountering spikes in demand or needs from a build team, are methods like outsourcing or using engineering agencies effective for speed? And if so, what do early stage companies need to be aware of?
Sure. No, I get this question a lot. And I think in an early stage startup, resourcing is challenged, right? I think the ability to hire in-house, bring engineering teams in-house, and do that quickly and nimbly can be tough. And so I definitely have leaned heavily, whether it's pre-series A, kind of in the early stage rounds, when you're building and growing your product, to lean pretty heavily on outsourcing. Now, I've had a lot of lessons learned, I will say, in terms of how you even think about what you want to outsource, how much of the team, the whole team, what you want to keep sort of close to you, if you're the first product leader or if you're the founder. And then what are those trade-offs, right? In terms of how you work with them, where they're located. Are they in the States? Are they not in the States? And how you deal with time zone. But it's something I really encourage people to think about more. I think sometimes when you're looking at building an app or your first product or the next version, you think about your IP and you think, well, we don't want to outsource that, right? We want to keep that all in-house, but speed really matters. And agencies have developed a lot. Offshoring has developed a lot, and especially to be a strategic product partner. And you can get the best of both worlds. But I do think some watch outs and things to think about, depending on what phase you're at, is location really matters, and time zones, depending. I'm in a company right now where we have teams spread all over, and that has been an interesting challenge for us, and we're continually reorganizing ourselves, but we're a little further along. But I think in early stage startups, when you think about getting some engineering delivery teams, QA, infrastructure, whatever it is, right, to power your development. Also look for agencies that give either, if you have a head of engineering or your agency is going to be your head of engineering. My scenario was I had a head of engineering in the US. I hired an agency out of Romania, but what they brought, which I thought was unique, and I would tell every startup to make sure you get this if you're going to outsource, is essentially a lead that worked with my head of engineering to manage our multiple pods and delivery teams because he was very close to their talents, their skills, their capabilities, and became kind of this lifeline for us. I rarely see it. I look for it now every time I'm looking for an agency or a partner to extend my development teams. And I really, I think the quality thing is just around, your trust and sort of how you set up, right, that structure and what you're building. I don't think, you can assume just because you're outsourcing, and really these are more fractional teams. I think of them as employees, not just outsourcing. They should be thought of as your teams. And so I highly encourage it. I think there's a lot of watch outs and things to consider, but it can be extremely helpful in moving quickly, not having to go through the rounds of hiring. It's a very competitive marketplace to find the right types of talent. So your first engineer, and you need to have sometimes changes in skills and capabilities, and you need to do it quickly, and partners can help you do that.
I'd love to double click on your experience with the agency that you worked with from Romania.
Sure.
And you mentioned that they brought a lead in, and that was something that you hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
For startups that maybe haven't worked with agencies or done outsourcing before, could you explain a little bit about what the status quo that you've usually seen and what was particularly special about working with this agency?
Yeah, no, great question. I think the norm has been and let's use this a real scenario. So I was in a smaller stage company where we had one senior developer, right? Not your head of engineering. We were looking to extend our engineering resources with a partner. Now, the traditional model would be to just work with an agency that places somebody with you, and then you're just responsible for everything, right? In terms of, it's more just talent hiring through an agency. It's not really a development team that is thinking about embedding in your product structure and engineering structure and having joint accountability for those outcomes. That's what I wanted, right? That's what I wanted, not necessarily people that were kind of fractional workers that we then had to manage. And then anytime we went to switch something, we had to work with the agency to switch things out. I wanted a much more embedded, integrated team. And that's a strategy now for more, I think, product-led engineering organizations that are agencies that go, hey, we understand you as a CPO or head of product or founder. We get what you need and want, versus just people. Right. And so it comes with a framework, and it comes with someone that can help be your partner with that, versus just, talent sourcing, so to speak, person by person. And that's where I think the space is, and that has a place in time. Don't get me wrong, that has a place in time. And when you're building something for the first time, or you have, hypotheses, experiments, risk, maybe it's for a B2B customer, you want to make sure you have a partner with you that's like, on the boat.
I really like what you said about really embedding that dev team and having that joint accountability. I completely agree that it's really, really helpful, especially at the early stage. I'd love to double click and look at the differences in how you think about working with agencies and outsourcing, how you think about this speed quality trade-off when you're working on B2B versus B2C.
I'd say the last 10 years I've been in businesses that in edtech, that have started in B2C and gone to B2B, have pivoted out of B2B and back into B2B, or have been in B2B and considered going B2C and experimented. So I've been in kind of both and seen the world where you have one singular market and space kind of in B2B, and you don't have the distractions necessarily. And in my current company, I have both, right? We're managing both. And so it's very nuanced and different. So in a B2B world, especially early stage, if you're starting B2B or if you're in B2C and you're considering a pivot into B2B are longer sales cycles. If you're looking for that first or second customer, right? It's not necessarily like B2C where it's very iterative. It could be much more on growth product sort of capabilities, right? Where you're looking to convert, more on funnel, more things up front, potentially just a different life cycle and much more iterative, and also on the product experience as well. You're getting constant user feedback. And with B2B, they're buying and have expectations and requests and problems that they believe you're going to be solving for them, and will hold a higher bar to quality necessarily because it's their reputation, right? And so if you have a first pilot or it's your first 2 to 4 logos, right, that you're bringing on board, your road mapping can look very different, right? In terms of thinking ahead around what the problems are you want to solve. How are you communicating that back and with maybe your pilot customers? Do they even understand they're the first pilot customers? That's usually always one of the things that I advise, to be as transparent as possible and treat them as partners, or even get them to be engaged like that, right? So that they can be part of the feedback cycle and not create, which can be, and I've seen this both ways, where a first enterprise client can really weigh down and drown your level of being able to innovate, because the requests, maybe the things that they're thinking about, aren't the problems that you want to solve in your vision. And so you have to navigate that really carefully, right? In terms of what do we just keep building, for them, and what's repeatable, maybe for the sales cycle or the value proposition for your head of sales or your GM or whoever's tasked, right, with starting to build that business, or your founder, if it's just your founder out there getting the next deals. So very different cycles, and very different ways of managing. And I'd even say on the B2B side, what I've seen and experienced, I came into a company where 100% was B2C and experimenting and thinking about going to B2B. And what wasn't seen and sort of known was that the B2C requests were kind of going direct into engineering, right? It was just this rapid cycle, and there was almost minimal focus on product development, which was kind of ironic. It was more on like growth and funnel and tech stack and all of those things, which was important. But we needed to maintain that agility, but also leave room for building customer value in your product, right? And growth in B2C can sometimes dominate into your roadmap, into customer value. And it seems almost counterintuitive, but both are really important, right? Building value for your customers and then also converting the customers. And that can create tension in your roadmap.
Some great points there on the differences between the B2C and B2B side. I really liked your point about how your first enterprise client can really weigh down or slow down your speed of iteration there. It really highlights the importance of knowing your ICP and knowing that if you sacrifice on your ICP early on, that can have a lot
Absolutely. Yeah. And you just have to be eyes wide open. And I think for founders and getting that first, and for the business, getting that first customer, it's so exciting, right? And you have assumptions on how you think it's going to go. And I don't know if I've ever seen it go the way I think it's going to go from the business implementation or the product side, but that's okay. And we'll talk about it a little bit, but this is where the road mapping process and having very clear, not just ICP, but your problems and how you resurface that as a product leader back to your strategic plan, back to your roadmap, and back to trade-offs and decisions and pivots. And it's a rhythm, and I think B2B is the one where I think you just have to be open, but clear about your hypotheses and make sure you kind of have, it's like a chessboard. You've played out that chessboard visually with your founder so that you can kind of revisit it, or your head of sales, whoever it is, right, in the early stage.
Well, that brings us very nicely onto our second topic, which is going to be about the product road mapping. And our first question, Cara, is, as companies grow, the roadmap becomes more and more important for sort of trade-off decisions across the company. Right. Sales, engineering, hiring, pulling you in so many different directions. Would love to know how the structure and granularity of the product roadmap should evolve as the company scales.
I get this question a lot. I have so many, and it's never a simple answer. I think the first thing to ask as a product leader or even a founder wearing the hat of product is, what's the intent of the roadmap, right? A roadmap is not a representation of a list of features that are due by a certain date, right? Your roadmap is meant to be a signal of intent and sequencing, right, of where you believe the biggest problems and opportunities are for your business that are represented in your product investments, right? And where are your bets? And then, if you double click on the first part of a roadmap and say, well, how are we going to do that? And when we deliver, sure, that's your delivery plan, right? But your roadmap is meant to be a unifying representation, right, of why we're doing what we're doing, what problems we're going to solve, when, now versus later, and represent and clarify vision. Right. And that's a lot, right? That's a lot to do, but can be done simply. And I always encourage visually. I think 70% of all individuals are visual learners. And so I highly, get out of the spreadsheets, get out of project plans, get out of that and use as much visualization as you can on what the customer vision is and then what stage you're at in that vision. If it's very early, great. And represent that, but also give people a sense of what might be next as like vision placeholders. And so, but as you grow, and you're in this phase, I think a misstep can be, a lot of times I've seen this and experienced it too. And it's a common, you're looking ahead on what you're thinking about and you're starting to build in so many directions. And that's when your roadmap can get really cluttered, right? You have big backlogs, you've got current customers with support requests, problems you're trying to identify, you're trying to boost engagement, whatever it is, right? And that requires a lot of prioritization, and it requires prioritization in synergy with what you think the biggest problems are and opportunities that you have today, right? And then how do you empower your product leaders? If it's one person kind of spanning all of this, or you're scaling and now you have 2 business units and you have 2 people, you need to make sure they're empowered to have those prioritization frameworks to facilitate those decisions in sort of that quarterly mode, or within a shorter time frame, but it's still always linked up to that strategic plan and vision, right? And so there's a ritual kind of to that, and how you visualize that, how you continually communicate and over communicate how you're making decisions, right? And how you're sequencing and why, and building confidence and trust in the roadmap, right? That when you do have a roadmap meeting, it's not a big surprise, right? People aren't taking it in. You want to rinse and repeat that as much as you can. And I remember at one startup, and I'm not going to take credit for this at all, this was actually my head of engineering. And I think, oh gosh, this is probably 7 or 8 years ago. I think the smartest thing he recommended we do with our roadmap, and it was in the time pre-COVID of when you were in offices all the time, is we had it hugely printed and visual, and it wasn't a big spreadsheet or anything like that. It was representations of the journeys and capabilities that we were investing in. And you could kind of walk through the office and see it, and see the sequencing of it, which was now and later, so you kind of knew in the quarter what we were doing, and that just created questions and inquiry. And I thought that was just a really brilliant idea.
I love that. And the visual representation, so the whole team is on the same page, can be very, very impactful, particularly so you move together as a team versus moving all in different directions.
And I was going to say, or if something moves, it doesn't feel as jarring. I think when people see the board, and so imagine a sticky note as a capability, and if we decide to say the hypothesis on that didn't pan out and here's why, and we're moving that, but here's what's moving in, it just feels less jarring versus like, we didn't deliver that, or we decided not to build it, or we traded that off, right? Those are like jarring statements. And so you want to always kind of keep sort of but where are we going, right? And why? And can I see it? That's a lot of like, can we see it? Can we talk about it? And it's an art of communication that, that there's lots of tools and artifacts and things I've used over the years that I keep for that. Because I'm continually refining it job to job and founder by founder and what they expect and need.
Definitely. And that communication aspect is so important to be able to bridge the gap of where you are today and where your vision is and how you're getting there. It reminds me of in the last Product Market Fit Academy episode we recorded, Guillermo shared some great advice that it's really important to be visionary, be aspirational, but don't only be visionary. Make sure you know what you're asking of your team right now in order to achieve that vision.
Exactly. Yes. And it really is the talents and strengths. It depends. I've worked for a lot of founders that they should be visionary. That's where you want them. And so you should be hip to hip with that person and articulating that. But a mission is different than your vision. And your vision should be 2 to 3 years, where you want to play, where you're different, why you believe it, what's happening in the space that, and Rinse and your CEO should be the biggest, and founders should be the biggest advocate for that. But where are we right now? And then why we're here is because there could be definitely pre-Series A, Series A, or if my God, if you don't have to take funding or whatever it is, you're trying to look for funding. You want to know what the next milestone is for the business. Okay, we want to invest in this next piece, but we're going to be here and we're going to show this, this, and this. And that's going to lead us to where we need to be next. And here's next, but don't distract yourself with it, but get excited about it. And it's not just words, there's actually like input and thinking around that. right? And validation or perspective.
You've touched on the importance of the communication and aligning the team, and I'd love
Yes.
to go one level deeper on that alignment question. What are the best practices for aligning the product roadmap with the company's business objectives and KPIs? Because a founder had said that a recent trend they'd noticed is outcome or opportunity based road mapping, defend against
Yes.
feature factors so that the roadmap is connected to real value. And they wanted to know when this works and when it doesn't.
Oh, that's such a good question. So as I talked about a little bit, the strategic plan, which should be a span of, it could be a year, it could be 6 months, right? Where are we running hard in the next, 6 months? Cascading that down. And so an example could be like, we do want to break into the B2B space, or we want to gain our next 5,000 users on our mobile app, whatever it is. And there's a time gate to that, right? In terms of your strategic plan, and then how you cascade that to go, well, what's that mean to product? What are our key KPIs, right? Let's break down the 5,000 users. Let's break down what the hypotheses are for B2B, and starting to theme and think about what those capabilities are. And this is where your product manager or your engineering team should be at the table for these conversations, right? Not just the delivery of it, but thinking around what that solution might look like, or what gaps or competitive differentiation we're looking to put in to achieve that company goal, right? The product roadmap should link to that, versus like, I think we should build this, and this. The question is, well, why? Right? Like, what is that going to achieve, right? Either in what outcome, what product KPI is that going to boost, or along with the business outcomes. And I think sometimes it's easy to over-index on the business outcome, which could be a sales number, or B2C, it could be like, we need to sell X number of subscriptions, whatever it is. You just have to balance. Product's job is to be the biggest advocate for the customer outcome, and how that customer value and that customer outcome translates to that financial outcomes, and what are those numbers and metrics, picking only a couple that could represent that. So I think I'm a huge fan of outcomes-based roadmap. It is a muscle, especially if you are coming into maybe a further along company where that hasn't been a muscle. It's a muscle you have to kind of stretch and go to the gym and start to get out of the feature factory mode. And there's a time and place for, sometimes it's just stuff we got to deliver and we got to do it. And there's a time and place for that. But you want to make sure as a head of product, you're really indexing very hard on outcomes. And one question related to that, I think you had shared with me, someone had asked, well, God, it's really hard if you don't know what the KPIs or the outcomes are. You're so early, but you got to land somewhere. You do have to land. I would push back and say, like, well, it may be hard to track, so if you have a set of capabilities and you're really trying to build habit building, and you have a hard hypothesis that this habit building will build engagement, and engagement will build stickiness and will build renewal, there's like a cascade there. And you're just not sure how you're going to know if the capabilities that you're maybe MVPing or building are going to lead to that outcome. Well, first, don't overbuild. B, do as many experiments as you can to get some signals, and then land on the signal. And, figure out what that smoke signal is that's going to, give you indicators. And by all means, don't get lost in the data. Call people, call your customers and talk to them and ask them and understand if it's solving the problem you think it's solving or how they perceive it. That's most important. Don't get lost in the data.
Absolutely. And keep those feedback cycles short with your actual
Constant,
customers.
short, constant, right, and iterative. Absolutely.
We had another question that was specifically on the tools side, and there are a lot of tools out there for product teams now, and founders would love to know which ones you would recommend for roadmaps, and what the best ways to connect your roadmap tool to engineering boards, Jira tickets, etc.
Yeah. Gosh, I feel like 10 years ago, there were no tools. And for product, I felt like no one was productizing around the product manager in the space. There was tons of Scrum, Agile Manifesto delivery things, and those are amazing, right? The Jiras of the world, the Confluences, all of that was on delivery performance, capacity, but the product manager was in PowerPoints and Google Drive and other places. And now there's, I don't know, a dearth of them, anything from product board to Oh gosh, Aha is one I've used a ton. And the great thing about those is it's not just capturing again the list of features and when you're going to do it and make it a pretty visual. It's actually connecting the capabilities of like, well, what differentiation? What's your competitive landscape? Where's your persona? Helps you visualize your persona, right? So it's giving you again visualization tools across the various artifacts that you constantly need to bring forward. And it's the job of the product manager. And you don't have to do it in a tool. You can do this outside, but just do it. Now there's actually productized solutions, which is amazing. And they're starting to integrate more into the Jiras and Confluences. So you can actually like have your, if you have a larger internal team or you have a big services support team, which my current company has right now, we are trying to figure that out, to be honest. We're trying to get out of spreadsheets and we've heard these things and, here's a request into sort of, a more rigorous process around how we connect those things into our problems, our competitive space, our gaps, our differentiations, theme them easier and quicker so we can sort it. Visualize it, and make decisions faster on it and just not have it grow. So yeah, I'm a big tool person. My current company knows that. People who know me. So yeah, Aha is a favorite of mine. Yeah, Product Board we're experimenting with. So yeah, lots of great tools there.
Great recommendations. Moving from that side, from the product road mapping, our last section is on stakeholder alignment. Specifically, as a company
Yes.
grows and you have your decision making becoming much more distributed, I'd love to know, Cara, the strategies that you've seen for transitioning from a very central CEO driven approach to a broader consensus model that includes very
Totally.
diverse stakeholder perspectives.
Yes. And I have a philosophy to not call anybody a stakeholder. Internally, it's because I feel like we're all in a boat. And I feel like, this is a point of view I have, and partly around the rituals and processes, because I feel like stakeholders are not on the boat. You're like going off to shore, picking them up or something, and then bringing them in and dropping them off. And I want people to be in the process in the boat with me and not considered like a stakeholder formality, and more of a keep holding on to that startup essence, even though you're growing, right? And I've been so lucky to be in companies where I've been like the 10th or 11th person and you're just wondering you're going to have a job tomorrow, and scaling through an IPO and seeing those rhythms, but holding on to that's so important, as you grow. But I do think, so a good example, so the early days, right, where there's like one decision maker, it's the founder or founders or the CEO, and then maybe you acquire a company, which I've been through. We acquired and we went into a space by acquiring a company. So boom, we had another division, right, overnight, and had a different roadmap. It was a different space, K-12 versus higher ed, right? So immediately then you start to have, well, do we have two separate roadmaps? We have separate strategic plans. How do they overlap, right? Is it one decision maker, two decision makers? Who gets to trade off, right? All of that starts to become a real thing. And so I think my lessons learned over time on that has been as early as possible and as quickly as possible as you start to have that, is to create a cadence around, you can call it a product roadmap meeting, but a strategic product review, or a council. I don't love the word council. It feels too formal, but the idea of it is, hey, look, and depends on the cadence and how much is changing in your company. At a company I was at that was going through hyper growth, acquire, new line, going in, we were being successful. The cadence ended up being only having to be quarterly because it was a lot of B2B. And so we didn't have the pace we needed. Another company I was at was only 50 people. We needed to have that pace every 4 weeks. And essentially it was bringing together, led by product, could be myself or, a product leader, whoever it was, leading a meeting that had key people around the table, your CEO, your founder. It had a core team and had some flex team members, right? Depending on what the topic was. But you had a consistent set of things you were going to do in that meeting, right? You were going to raise 3 to 5 decisions that needed to be made across these business units or strategically. Things like, oh my gosh, that B2B customer moved way faster than we thought. It's ready to close, but we're in the middle of building 3 new products for the other group. How do we handle that? What are we willing to stretch on? And it's not something you can do alone as the CPO, right? Like that's something you have to create the consensus. What you should do is bring as much information, scenario plans, and trade-offs and recommendations so that there can be a quick decision. Don't just come with the question, come with a couple scenarios right behind it. And then be able to show at the same time, here's decisions we need to make. Here's current state. Here's where we are right now. It could even be showing the sprint plan, right? Just be like, here's what's coming up next. Here's what's coming up in the next 3 months in our strategic plan and our roadmap. And here's why, right? Here's some new things we're doing. And then here's these decisions we got to make. And that actually just creates, I think people underestimate, especially in different business units as you're building them, the ability to stay close to that jigsaw puzzle is your job as product. Other groups just stay close to their stuff, and that's their job, right? And so, but you need to service the founder, the CEO, and the growth and the multiple customer bases, right? And so that ritual and getting the right artifacts and muscle is really important, but do it soon, especially if you find or hear symptoms if you're coming into a company, or maybe you're the first product hire, and you're coming in and you're starting to hear that, well, I'm not sure where we're going. Or are we doing that now? Or if you're starting to hear those things, get that meeting together and just start surfacing them and figuring out how quickly does your company, is it good at making quick decisions? Can you make quick decisions? And don't assume that it can, right? And so that group, you try to keep small and intimate. And sometimes I would rotate in a different business unit. But as we grew, I've rotated in I've given the table, which is a growth opportunity for my product managers, right? And now you've got a growth opportunity. Your product managers are empowered. They're not just listing features. They're empowered to actually dialogue on these things. A real growth opportunity, right, for your product team. And honestly, less talking for me. You're more in the early stage, but then you kind of get your teams running those, and you're there for the big disconnects or the sticky, ugly, topics that you're like, no, we don't want to make a trade-off. Well, we got it. Okay, well, let's have a side meeting on that. So that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's super important, really, really important, and a good problem to have, but one I highly encourage to create those kind of rituals sooner than later. And not just, I've seen the darker side, not the dark side, but the alternative, I just think it's harder and I don't find it as impactful, is to bespoke all that. Oh, let me go to that team and talk about the roadmap. Oh, let me go to that team. Okay, now I'm going to go to that team. You don't get the synergy that you need and the decision making.
That was a really great example of the power of this strategic product review and how important it is to bring the different, I don't know what word to use instead of stakeholders, but the different teams together.
Team leaders. Yes. Yeah. People that are accountable and worry every night about their business outcome. Remember that, right? They're worried about their business outcome. Where's the higher ed space going? Where's K-12 going? You're in a vertical. Oh my gosh, I'm the mobile app team. You're worried about that. And that's what they should worry about. I feel this is the weight that product carries as a product leadership team. Is your weight is you have to carry along possibly the things that go across them and then surface them up and be able to do that, right? More as head of product. And then I'd say your product managers get tight where they need to get tight.
It really sounds like the role of head of product is this convener of teams to bring everyone together and force them to be exposed to what KPIs everyone else is following and understand how it all fits together. Something that must come with that is navigating strong conflicting opinions with different leaders in different teams. And also you must have situations where you have strong opinions within a leadership team that sometimes might go against user feedback or customer feedback. How do you navigate those two scenarios where you have conflicting opinions between leaders and between teams, but then also conflicting opinions maybe between a team and user feedback?
Yeah. I mean, it should happen, right? It's going to happen, right? And regardless of how, what you think your strategic plan is and your vision is, that should happen and will happen. And so how do you handle it? Right. I mean, part of it is these forums for the bigger ones where there's a big strategic conflict, right? Not just an opportunity of a deal coming in, but maybe I'm seeing across the roadmap, multiple investments in areas that are duplicative, right? Or not efficient, right? And sometimes I notice things, or sometimes there's one of my product team can run into that conflict, right? Of like, well, we had this hypothesis. This is saying this. This is not what we thought. What do we do about it? Right. And so just creating, again, like conversation and communication opportunities. Sometimes I'll just go in one-on-one and try and address them, Zara. Honestly, those types of, if it's in market or in a channel or in, in a space, see if I can help, try and understand sort of where that blocker is or that conflict. But I want to have the product teams empowered to figure out that conflict on their own, right? And make the decision and just say, look, Kara, here's what we saw. Here's on the roadmap. Here's what we're recommending. We go left instead of right. And or to understand that there is an ultimate decision maker. So this comes down to good old RACI charts or whatever you want to do. Who's responsible, who's accountable, and who needs to be consulted. And ultimately there is decision making, right, to be had. And I want to make sure my product team can be as powered as possible for decision making. But when you do have teams and partners that are impacted by that, how you communicate the deprioritization of something or why, you want to bring them along, right? Because usually you hope that if you're doing that, it's because it has negative impact on the business, or it's putting maybe the development so complex or something around how you can execute it that the time's just not right. You have limited resources, right? And you just have to be clear around what that decision matrix is, right? Around what you're doing versus like, we're conflicted. What do we do about it? It's like, well, okay, let's kind of come through this. And then there will be an ultimate decision maker. And sometimes that can be where things slow down is like, well, who decides that? Right? Who decides how to handle that conflict? My ideal, it's not always happened, is that your product person can make those recommendations because they know the market, they know the space, they know what their hypothesis is, right? But if you're going up, I think if a founder has a really hard point of view on a certain area, right, and a high belief, right, that could just be a deeper conversation to have around why are we indexing on that belief so hard? And if we're seeing signals, do you just need more signals? What is needed, and getting clear on that before, making sort of what can be an emotional decision, maybe to move away from something that's not working, right? That's just not working. And that's really hard.
So one, giving teams forums to discuss these disagreements, two, knowing what needs to be true to make a decision, and then three, really communicating those decisions and what led up to that decision with teams when you do have disagreements. Yeah. Even if a team feels like Absolutely. It didn't go the way that they wanted, they understand why it didn't, and you've really brought them along on that journey.
Yeah, you might have to, we use this term a lot at Springboard now, and I love it. I haven't used it as much as disagree and commit. At some point you have to disagree and commit, right? And how far will the disagreement go? Where do you commit? How deep does someone believe? Maybe it's in a feature team or a pod or a cross-functional team. You got to disagree and commit. And I love that concept. And I find people will disagree and commit. And when they're not, it's because something's really deep under that. And that's important to get under. But most of the time you can figure out a way to disagree and commit. Amicably and professionally. Ultimately you must.
If you have this speed quality trade-off, and speed is in any way important to you, at some point you definitely will need that disagree and commit.
Yeah, you just got to disagree and commit and kind of go, well, we're not surfacing anything else here. We need to go left or right, and we're going to either disagree and commit, but somewhere we got to move. We got to go. And that's really important.
Move or die, basically.
Okay, move or die for another Zoom meeting. You don't want to have another Zoom meeting on it, right? And if you're on a fourth meeting, that's a signal. Something's not going right on that.
Thank you so much, Kara. Let's move into the final part of our session today, which is our quick fire round. So I'm going to ask you a quick question and would love for you to respond with a one-line response. Are you ready?
Okay.
What's the most critical metric that every product manager should monitor?
What immediately comes to my mind is anything around retention. So at my old company, it was NRR. That was, we lived and died by. It could be monthly active users, daily active users, anything with engagement and retention, I feel like has to be a North Star because it represents customer value.
Agile or waterfall? Which do you prefer for product development?
I don't know anyone that prefers waterfall, but yeah, definitely any form of agile. So, but I haven't been in waterfall in a long time.
How do you prioritize features in a crowded product backlog?
Carefully and use rice, ice, use a framework.
What's one book you recommend to all founders to get better at product?
Okay, I love this book. I knew you were going to ask this, so I went and got it. It's called Build What Matters: Delivering on Outcomes. You can see I love it so much that I carry it around, and I have little. But it's probably the best book on vision-led product management that I've read. Founded by two people that have gone through many startups and stages in product-led organizations. Fantastic. Can't say enough about it.
And last question, in one sentence, how do you define product market fit?
I would say satisfying customer problems.
On that note, Cara will wrap up. Thank you so much for all your insights on product today, from speed versus quality to road mapping to aligning teams. We have covered so much, and I really appreciate you sharing all that.
Thank you so much. Loved it. Happy to do it.
Thanks for listening to the Emerge Product Market Fit Academy. If you enjoyed this episode, please like it, follow our channel, and if you're feeling generous, share it with a friend.